Okay, so this is going to be our mini lesson on point of view and perspective. So this is a little bit of a confusing topic, and I'm going to try to do a mini lesson today where my goal is by the end of the mini lesson, I want to take something that might be a little bit confusing and I want to make it easy for you to understand. Sound good? Okay. So when we think of point of view normally, we usually think of what? We think of first person, third person limited, third person omniscient, all of that stuff, right? And that is usually what we think of with point of view. It's usually the type of narrator that's used in a story. And we know that first person is going to sound like the character is speaking from their own perspective, like I felt scared. And we know third person is going to sound like the narrator's on the outside describing what's happening to the character. So it might sound more like he felt scared or she felt scared or they were walking, right? They're describing what's happening to the character. So whenever we've talked about point of view in the past here in 6th grade, we've talked about whether it's first person or third person, right? That kind of point of view. When we did our narrative writing stories, what did I make you pick? A point of view, right? And you had to pick first person or third person. Now here's the tricky part. Here's the confusing part. On your state test, they might ask you about a character's point of view, but they are not looking for you to tell them, is it first person or third person? Weird, right? Because that's what we've learned point of view is. They're not going to be asking you, is it first person or third person? They really want to know what the character's perspective is. So when they say point of view, they're not looking for you to say first person or third person. They want to know the way the character feels about whatever is happening in the story. So how that character is viewing whatever is going on in the story. But on your state test, guys, they're going to use that interchangeably. So what that means is they might say point of view, what is the character's point of view? And they really want to know what? What is their perspective? They want to know what is their perspective. I'm going to have you guys just practice telling me what perspective is, because perspective is kind of like a fancy way and fancy ELA way of saying just the way the character feels about whatever's going on in the story. Okay, so what is the way the character feels about what is happening in the story? Everybody, perspective. What is perspective? The way the character feels about what is happening in the story. And on your state test, they're going to say point of view, but they really want to know what is the character's perspective. So I'm going to show you a real state test question. Get this out of the way. I'm going to show you a real state test question. This is from a couple of years ago. And if you notice here, they say, how does the author most develop Grandpa's point of view in the story? And look at your 4 choices. Do they talk about first person or third person at all? No, they're really talking about how the author develops Grandpa's, what? Everybody, perspective in the story, how they're showing how he feels about something. What's the fancy ELA word for how a character feels about what's going on? Perspective. So here in this question, they say point of view, but what you really have to be able to describe is how the author developed Grandpa's perspective. They say point of view, they really want to know his perspective. Okay, but here's another fancy thing here that I need to teach you. Did they ask what Grandpa's point of view is here? Look at the question. What do they actually ask? Yes, they didn't say what is Grandpa's point of view. They said, how does the author most develop Grandpa's point of view in the story? And so what they want us to do is they want us to analyze what the author did, how the author showed you Grandpa's feelings. Okay, and I know that seems a little confusing, but we're going to break it down today so that it's a lot easier. So, oops. Okay. So as you are reading, I'm going to get rid of this. Oh, good. Okay. So as you are reading any kind of story, I want you to always think about what the perspective or point of view of the main character is. And we're going to look at how does the author show you their perspective. So does the author show it to you through dialogue with another character? Sometimes they will, right? So if my character's name is Jesse and the author says Jesse walked in the room, he shouted, "I love hunting. I can't wait to go hunting today." Do you? Do we know how the character Jesse, what his perspective on hunting is? What's his perspective on hunting? He loves it. Does he think it's a good thing or a bad thing? He thinks it's a good thing. How did we know that? How did the author show us that he thinks it's a good thing? Right. He said, "I love hunting. I can't wait to go hunting." And he said it in his what? Dialogue. Okay. So that's going to be one way that an author might show us a character's perspective. Let me show you what this looks like. Okay. Here's an example. Mark sat up in bed all day and yelled to his mom, "Today is the day. It is finally my birthday. Yay!" So, what are some clues that this is dialogue? That the author is showing us how he feels through dialogue? Well, there are quotation marks, right? That's always going to be a clue that it's dialogue. Quotation marks around what he's saying. What's the other clue that it's dialogue? Everybody. A dialogue tag. It said Mark yelled to his mom. So we know he is saying it out loud. Does that dialogue that's highlighted in blue, "Today is the day, it is finally my birthday, yay," does that tell us how he feels? Yes. How does he feel about his birthday? Everyone. What's a fancy word that means how he feels about something going on? Everyone? Perspective. So it does give us his perspective, and it tells us that he loves his birthday. Now let's do a different perspective. What if Mark sat up in bed and yelled something else to his mom, and the dialogue told us that he didn't love his birthday? What could be something he might say? Mark sat up in bed and yelled to his mom, "I hate my birthday. I wish it wasn't today. It's always such a big deal, and I don't like attention." What would his perspective be? He doesn't like his birthday. And how did the author show us that? By his what? Nope. What was the strategy that the author used? Dialogue. They had him say words out loud to show his perspective. Okay. All right. That was number one. The author is going to show sometimes a character's perspective by using their dialogue. But that's not the only way an author shows perspective. We also might have to analyze and say, did the author show perspective by describing the character's thoughts? So in this picture, it says, "My palms began to sweat as the conductor raised his baton. I hope I don't screw up." Can we make an assumption about what that character's perspective is? How does he feel about performing in the band, everyone? He's nervous, right? Did the author tell us something out loud? Nope, not in dialogue. Here, the author described the character's own inner thoughts. Here's another example of this. "She waited for the roller coaster to begin. This is exactly the thrill I have been waiting for all summer." Here are the clues that it's the character's inner thoughts. One is that the author wrote it in italics. Does everybody remember what italics is? Everybody put your hands like this. And now slant them and say italics. Okay? When the author is showing a character's inner thoughts, a lot of times, not 100% of the time, but a lot of times, they're going to put the words in italics. They're going to slant it. That's a tool authors use to show thoughts, okay? You're also going to see it was in a third person narrator. She waited for the roller coaster to begin. Then when they show the character's inner thoughts, what point of view did the author show? First person. This is exactly the thrill I have been waiting for all summer. It shows that now they're describing the character's inner thoughts, their own thoughts about something. Do we know how this character feels about roller coasters? How do we know? How does she feel? And there's a specific word that this character shows in their thoughts, everybody. Thrill. We usually think of a thrill as something positive, right? Does everybody view roller coasters as something positive and exciting? Raise your hand in here if anybody feels like roller coasters are not exciting and they're scary. My gosh, in my last class, 90% of the class raised their hand that they thought they were scary. You all think they're thrilling? Nobody's scared? Well, so a lot of people have a different perspective. A lot of people view roller coasters as scary, where other people view them as thrilling. Those are two different perspectives, right? But this author showed us that this character thinks that roller coasters are thrilling by showing the characters what? Inner thoughts. So now we've gone over two ways that an author might show a character's perspective. All right, so we've gone over two that an author might show a character's perspective through their dialogue or their inner thoughts. Now we're going to move on to the third way an author might show a character's perspective, which is sometimes, guys, they might just come right out and describe it from the narrator. So the narrator is just going to tell us how the character is feeling, okay? So let me show you what that might look like. Kim looked at her room. She felt so overwhelmed by the mess and didn't know how to start. So we know this isn't her inner thoughts because it's not coming from her, right? Someone else, the narrator, is describing it. So the clues that the narrator is describing it is that the author said the character felt so overwhelmed. She felt so overwhelmed by the mess. So the narrator actually gave a feeling or described a feeling of the character. Do we know what the character's perspective is here? How does she feel about having to clean her room? She felt overwhelmed looking at her room, okay? Oopsie. How many of you have the same perspective as this character, that if you see a big mess in your room, you feel overwhelmed? That's a lot of people's perspective. How many of you see a big mess in your room and you have a different perspective where you are like, yes, I love to clean and organize, and I'm excited to get this all picked up? Or I'm seeing from some of your faces, maybe there's a third perspective where you don't really care about the mess, you don't want to clean it up, and you're fine with letting it sit there. Okay, so three different perspectives. But we know from the way that this author developed Kim's perspective that Kim felt how? Overwhelmed by the mess. So we know this because the narrator described the way the character felt. Okay. And we have talked a lot about analyzing a character's feelings, thoughts, dialogue, right? To know certain things about them. We've done it to analyze their character traits, but now we're using it to see how the author developed their perspective. So it's really the same strategy. It's just now we're analyzing their point of view and perspective. And there's one more. So the author might show you the character's perspective by describing their interactions with other characters or just their own actions. So actions that we can like see them doing, like verbs, actions, okay? My conductor looked at me and nodded with a smile. I smiled back and took a deep breath, okay? Before we knew that other character in the band concert was nervous. What do we know about this character? What were his actions or interactions with the other character in this example? What were their interactions? They smiled and they took a deep breath. They smiled and took a deep breath. Does that show us that that character is nervous or feeling positive about performing? Positive. What could it have said if the author wanted to develop a character who felt nervous about performing? What actions might they have described the character having? So let's think about actual actions of the character. So maybe instead of smiling back, what might they have done? Maybe like there was a scared look on their face and they looked down at their feet, right? What else might a character have done, an action, if they felt nervous? So probably if they felt nervous, well, let's think about an actual action that they're taking. So like maybe they start tapping their foot, right? Because they have a lot of nervous energy. Or maybe they shot their mom a nervous look in the crowd, right? And they stared at their mom with a nervous look on their face. Those would be actions a character might take that really show that their perspective is what? Nervous, right? But this character smiled and just took a deep breath. So we're thinking the perspective might be feeling pretty positive. Let's look at another one. Where we're describing a character's actions. The author is showing us what their perspective is by describing actions. Bill ran to the ball as he pushed Kevin out of the way. Kevin growled at him and tripped him, laughing as Bill fell. So what were some character actions here? Go ahead, shout them out. Pushing Kevin. Kevin growling at Bill. Laughing when he fell. Tripping him. So those actions are clues that the author is showing us how they feel by describing their actions. Pushing is an action, growling is an action, tripping him, and then laughing as he fell is an action. And what do those actions tell us? What do those actions tell us about how these characters feel or their perspective about each other? We know how they feel. They don't what? They don't like each other. Now, what if it said, Kevin accidentally tripped him and quickly reached down to help him up when he fell? Then we would know that Kevin's perspective in the situation is what? How does he feel about what happened? He felt regretful and sorry, and he cared about Bill getting hurt because he helped him up, right? But in this scenario, those actions didn't happen. In this scenario, he growled at him, he tripped him, and then he laughed when he fell. And that shows that they do not like each other, right? So their actions can tell us a lot. If we analyze their actions, we learn a lot. All right. So we are going to be wrapping up the mini lesson now, but we're going to be doing a lot of work with this going forward. But those are going to be the four strategies we're going to talk about that an author might use to show a character's perspective.